Alright, what's up guys? In today's video, I'm going to be giving you what I think are currently the best power paddles on the market for summer 2025. But we are going to be doing this video just a litle bit different than probably how you would expect. First, we're going to be splitting this video into two parts. The first part is going to be focusing on the high-end power performance paddles, and then the second portion is going to be focusing on other power paddles that I would consider to be in the lower tier of power paddles. That doesn't mean they're worse, they just don't hit quite as hard as the top ones. I think this distinction is really important because there's definitely a difference in how powerful those style of paddles are, and depending on your play style, you may heavily prefer one over another. Also, instead of ranking these paddles from best to worst or first to 10th, I'm going to be presenting you the pros and cons of all the paddles so that you can make a decision for yourself. I think one thing that's really important to understand about the pickleball paddle market is there is no one best paddle. No matter what someone says, there isn't a paddle that universally is best for everyone. There's always a set of pros and cons, and everyone's needs are completely different, as well as their budget. So, depending on what you value, one of these paddles may be a better fit for you than another. We do have full reviews of almost every single paddle that we're going to be talking about today. There are a couple that we don't yet, and if you do want to watch those full reviews, you can check it out in the description. And then finally, for most of the paddles in this list, you can use discount code PBStudio to save some money at checkout, and we'll also have those linked down in the description. But anyways, let's start off with the high-tier performance power paddles. First, we're going to start with Joola, and this is probably a surprise to nobody. I would say over the last year and a half, Joola has basically dominated the power paddle market. If you go to any tournament and look at a 5-0 or open division bracket, you're just going to see Joolas in everyone's hands. And that's because the raw performance of these paddles is very good. The sweet spots are great, the power and pop are there, but you still have very good control for how powerful the paddles are. These paddles also come in 14mm and 16mm thicknesses, as well as multiple shapes. They have a wide body and then 4 different elongated shapes that you can choose from. Some with a shorter handle, some with a longer handle, some with an arrow curve head, so the swing weight's a little bit lower. Depending on what you're looking for, especially in the elongated option, they probably have an option for you. The only thing that they're really missing is a hybrid shape. I would say overall as a power paddle, the Pro 4s are very competitive across the board. There's only one con that basically makes it really hard to recommend to everyone out there. And that is the fact that these paddles still core crush. Even though Joola said this was a big focus for them and they were hoping it was going to be fixed, this is still a big problem. If you look throughout my Discord, you will find tons of people who are saying their Pro 4s are core crushing in a couple weeks and that they've had to replace them multiple times. I actually just played a local tournament and several Pro 4s in the bracket were core crushed. But it's impossible to ignore that these paddles do perform very well before they break. But if you're a big banger, you just might break the paddles kind of quickly. So you have to weigh whether or not the price and the durability is a concern for you. If it's not, then sure, go ahead, buy a couple Pro 4s and replace them when you need to. Performance is great, but for a lot of people out there, that can be really annoying. Now, going from the Joola, we have another paddle to talk about because it's essentially just a Joola Pro 4 clone, and I wouldn't say it's definitively better, it's just a little bit different, and that would be the Thrive Project Fury. This is essentially constructed nearly identical to a Joola Pro 4, except it comes in a hybrid shape, and instead of being an all carbon fiber face, it has carbon fiber, fiberglass, and carbon fiber, which just makes it a little bit stiffer than the Joola, and at the net, you can counter the ball just a little bit harder than you can on the Joola. Now, the advantage for the Project Fury over the Joola is that it's $200 instead of $280. However, it does come with the drawback that the warranty is 6 months and you only get 2 replacements, whereas with the Joola, you get 1 year and 3 replacements. So when you're choosing between these paddles, you basically have to gauge if spending nearly an extra $100 is worth the longer warranty, or if you don't use a paddle for that long, maybe you can purchase this one and then pocket the extra cash and save up for the next paddle. And then in terms of performance, the big difference is just going to be that the Thrive Project Fury is going to be a little bit harder on the soft game because it is stiffer, but if you're someone who likes to be really aggressive at the net, you may find that you like it just a little bit more than the Joola. And then the last con is since it's built like a Joola Pro 4, it more than likely is going to have the same core crushing issues that the Pro 4 has had. Any paddle that's been built with a Gen 3 construction eventually has core crushing issues, so I'm not super optimistic that it's going to be a lot better here. All right, the next paddle in the list is the Selkirk Labs Project Boomstik, and this is personally one of my favorite paddles in this entire list right now. The pros of this paddle are, one, that it is one of the most powerful and poppy paddles in this list. I do think there are some paddles that kind of go neck and neck with it, so if you're looking for a lot of pop and power, the Boomstik, as the name implies, is going to give it to you. The next pro, which is still kind of being figured out, so I wouldn't take this for Selkirk's word immediately, but they do have their Infinigrit on this paddle, which they're claiming lasts 3 times longer than raw carbon fiber. And if that claim does turn out to be true, that would be a big win, because grit durability in the high performance market has been an issue for a very long time. So if it's true that it lasts 3 times longer, that is a big pro. But we have a lot more testing to do before we figure this out, so we'll keep you guys posted as soon as we know. Then next up, for how powerful and poppy this paddle is, it has a gigantic sweet spot. And I hate overusing that term or trying to make it sound like, oh man, this paddle has no spot where it isn't a sweet spot. But seriously, of all the power paddles I have hit, I do think that the Boomstik has the best sweet spot out there. And this is partially because they put 15 grams of weight on the side of the paddle, which is going to boost the stability like crazy, and is something that you could do to your own paddle if you wanted to add that much weight in that location. But stock, out of the box, this paddle has an incredible sweet spot. And then the last pro for this paddle is that it has a lifetime warranty. So if something goes wrong, Selkirk has had some of the best customer service in the whole industry, oftentimes even shipping you a new paddle before you even have to ship the old one back. So if customer service and a long warranty is important to you, the Boomstik does give it to you. But now let's talk about the 2 cons of this paddle that come to mind. The first one is this paddle is $333, which is completely crazy. Most high-end power paddles these days are $280, so going up an extra $53 is kind of crazy, but if Infinigrit holds true and the lifetime warranty is important to you, then maybe that extra money is well spent in your eyes. But overall, I think $333 is pretty insane. Now, the last con is the MOI tuning weights. While it does give you a great sweet spot out of the box, for some of you out there, the paddle stock might just be heavier than what you're able to use. If you're someone who has weaker wrists or you just like lighter paddles, then I don't think the Boomstik is going to fit you that well. Or if you're just someone who likes to tinker and really set up the paddle the way you want, the Boomstik does limit some of your options. All right, next up, let's talk about the GX2 Power from Gearbox. Starting off with the pros, this one offers a different feel at ball contact than a lot of the other power paddles out there. A lot of power paddles tend to be very immediate feedback, a little bit stiffer. The rebound is very fast when you hit the ball, but on the GX2 Power, you're getting a lot of dwell time. The ball just really feels like it sinks into the face and then throws off. So when you go to hit a counter, it might not feel like the pop is as quick as something like a Joola Pro IV or a Boomstik, but it definitely hits the ball very hard. I wouldn't let these softer feel of the paddle trick you into thinking it isn't a powerful paddle. And for those of you out there that aren't a fan of stiffer paddles that don't feel like they have as much dwell time, that is going to be one of the biggest pros of the GX2 Power. So some of the other pros of the GX2 Power are, one, that they offer a hybrid shape, which not all companies do, so if you really love that shape, Gearbox does have that. And then 2, these paddles don't need a lot of customizing, and they also come in at lower swing weights than previous Gearboxes. I find that these paddles overall are very easy to swing for their respective shapes with the hybrid and the elongated. So most people, unless you're sensitive to swing weights and you really need something lower, these are all going to be fine. And then lastly, I just don't think they need a lot of customizing. I think they play great out of the box. If you want to add a little bit more stability or a little bit more plow through, you can. But honestly, I could play these paddles stock and really not have many complaints. Now, here are some of the cons. The first is a break-in period. This was one of the cons for me personally. So I actually really liked how the paddle felt out of the box. Everything was awesome. The pop, the power, the feel off the face, it was all great. But after I used it more and more, it did change where the face got softer and it felt like it was pocketing the ball even more. And that made it just feel a little like mushy or hard to tell how I was hitting the ball. So it kind of lowered my confidence. And the pop and power also went up, which just made it harder for me to control. So as I used it more and more, power and pop awesome. If you wanted to hit the ball really hard, it absolutely does that, no problem. But for me, it came at the expense of control, and I wasn't as big of a fan of how the ball felt off the face. It was just a little too muted for what I prefer. Now, if you like paddles like that, you will probably love this, but you just have to know if you're someone who likes slightly stiffer feeling paddles or slightly softer and more muted feeling paddles. All right, now for the last paddle in the high tier performance power paddles, we have the PaddleTek Bantam series. Some of the pros of this paddle, and probably the biggest defining one of the PaddleTek, is the consistency and durability of these paddles. While other companies have been chasing Gen 3 and trying to squeeze out as much performance as they can at the expense of durability, PaddleTek has kind of gone the opposite way. Their paddles play very consistent from day one, and even after multiple tournaments and a lot of use, these paddles still play very similar. Over time, they do tend to start going more dead, and maybe they won't be as lively, but they don't turn into a rocket launcher, and there's no big break-in period on these paddles. To me, this is one of the biggest reasons that someone would still buy a PaddleTek, is if they really value consistency and durability in their equipment. Otherwise, they also have 3 shapes, the wide body, hybrid, and elongated, and then for the wide body and elongated, they actually offer a short handle and a long handle version, so if you're looking for something that fits your hand shape a little bit better, PaddleTek does have multiple options. They also have the 12.7 and 14.3 millimeter thickness, so if you're looking for something with a little bit less pop and power, you can go for the thicker one, and if you want all gas, no brakes, you can go for the 12.7 millimeter. And for the wide body paddles, the ESQC and the ALWC, they actually have very low swing weights, so if you're someone with weaker wrists or you really want a light paddle, those are great ones to start with because the swing weights are somewhere between around 103 and 108, and that is very light. And then the last pro is that these do offer a lifetime warranty. So if you have any issues, PaddleTek has generally been known to take care of the issues without much fuss. Now let's talk about the cons, because the biggest con with the PaddleTeks by far is the sweet spot size. Of any paddle in this list that we're going to talk about, PaddleTek definitely has the worst sweet spot, and by a pretty good margin. As soon as you start missing outside of the center, especially near the top, the ball tends to just die off the face and not really go anywhere. So I think the PaddleTek is best suited for higher level players who can consistently hit the sweet spot. That doesn't mean other levels can't use it, but I think you may have a harder time. When you combine a very poppy paddle with a smaller sweet spot and you just don't hit the center consistently, sometimes it's just hard to know what you're going to get out of the paddle. And this is one of the reasons that I have a hard time using it. Sometimes I go to hit a dink and it pops way up when I nail the center. Other times I miss a little bit and it's a little bit lower. So sometimes it's just hard for me to gauge how I should swing. So because of this, I do think that the PaddleTeks are starting to taper off in terms of a power paddle that I can easily recommend. But because of their consistency and durability, that is still one of the biggest reasons that I can recommend them. But if we're talking raw performance across all these paddles, I think PaddleTek is starting to lag behind a little bit. All right, now let's talk about some of the lower tier power paddles. And I don't mean lower tier as in these are worse. These just have less pop and power than some of the paddles we just talked about. And because of that, they tend to be a little bit easier to use, and they're a great bridge between all court and power paddles. All right, first up, we have the Honolulu J2NF. This is a full foam core paddle, and it's not really going to do anything that out of the box is going to completely wow you. The last list of paddles we talked about, they kind of have that wow factor that when you start playing with them, you're like, I can drive the ball so hard. I have so much pop on my counters. And I think the Honolulu is more of a balanced paddle. I think some of the reasons it became really appealing are, one, it's a full foam core paddle at a not ridiculous price. The stability and sweet spot size on the regular J2NF is very good. So I think it's one of those paddles that can be very easy for a wider range of people to use, and it comes in at a great price. But if you're expecting to just completely kill people with counters or drives, you might not necessarily do that with the J2NF. Now, here are the cons. It doesn't have the same type of crisp, immediate feeling pop that something like a Boomstik, a Joola Pro IV, or a Thrive Project Fury are going to have. It kind of sinks into the face, feels a little bit like more dense, and then kind of throws the ball. Not as much as the GX2 Power, but somewhere between that and a Boomstik. So if you're someone who really loves the immediate fast rebound of some of those other paddles, the J2NF might not give it to you. And then the last thing is the customer service of Honolulu. This is something that I hear complaints about all the time. The way the pre-orders have recently been handled, people have been waiting a couple months for their paddles, and sometimes people are just getting slow responses. So do just know that customer service has not not been known to be the greatest with Honolulu. All right, next up we have the 11624 Power Series and Alpha Pro Power. I'm clumping these paddles together because really I think what it comes down to with these is whether you want a really stiff feeling paddle or you want something that is slightly less stiff. Personally, I would not call the Alpha Pro Power a soft, not stiff feeling paddle, but it is less stiff than the Power Series. As I've been testing these two paddles, I really just think it comes down to the feel off the face that you want, and everything else is very similar across the board. I wouldn't say sweet spot is way better on one over the other. The swing weights aren't way better on one over another. It really just comes down to the feel that you expect when you hit the ball. And the other thing is the Alpha Pro Power is $30 more than the Power Series. So you also have to weigh whether you want to spend a little bit more money and get a 1-year warranty on the Alpha Pro Power, or you can spend $30 less and get the 6-month warranty on the Power Series. But overall, these are both very good paddles. I would kind of put them in the category of they're very reliable and they won't necessarily get you in a lot of trouble if you're used to using paddles that are slightly more powerful. If you're coming from a control paddle, there might be an adjustment period, but otherwise higher all court, I don't think you're going to struggle very much with these, and they tend to just be very consistent, relatively easy to use paddles. And they come at a great price compared to a lot of the paddles that are on the high tier category. Now, I'm not going to lie, I tried to really think about the cons for these paddles, and it was very hard to come up with any. The only con that I could really come up with is the 6-month warranty that the Power Series has versus the 1 year that the Alpha Pro Power has, compared to some of the lifetime and 1-year warranties with the other paddles. But seriously, that is all I have to complain about. They have 3 shapes. If you want a wide body, hybrid, or elongated, they have it. And the paddles just don't give you a lot of fuss. 11624 has done a really good job eliminating things in their paddle that would give you a lot to complain about. They're just very easy, consistent paddles to use. Now, similar to the two paddles I was just talking about, we have the SLK Era, and I'm kind of just like the Pro 4 and the Fury gonna clump this in there. The SLK Era is similar to the Power Series from 11624. The biggest differences I've found is that the Era feels a little bit more dense than the Power Series, which in comparison feels a little bit more hollow. Personally, I would recommend, if you can, just try both and see which one you like a little bit more. Some people do tend to have a preference one way or another. One of the biggest reasons that might sway you is that the SLK Era has a 1-year warranty, the Power Series is 6 months, but the Power Series is also $40 cheaper after a discount code than the Era, so you kind of have to weigh if you'd rather save the money or have the warranty. But in my opinion, the Era is a very good lower tier power paddle in the same way that the 11624 Power Series are. They're built very similarly with some very minor differences that contribute to how they might feel slightly different, but overall, both very good paddles. Kind of just depends on, do you want a Selkirk paddle or do you want an 11624? The one thing that is worth noting is that on the SLK Era, you only get 2 shape options. You get a wide body and an elongated, both with long handles, whereas with 11624, you do have 3 shape options. And then as far as cons go, honestly, similar to the Power Series, there's just really not much to complain about. In fact, one of the biggest things you could probably rave about a little bit more is how good Selkirk's customer service tends to be. But overall, yeah, it's just not a very fussy paddle. All right, now we have our last paddle in the list, and that is the Franklin C45. And it's not last in this list because it's the worst paddle. It actually has some things that I think are very appealing to certain demographics of people. So they have 3 shapes. They have a wide body, they have a hybrid, and they have an elongated. And all of those come in a 14mm and 16mm thickness, except the hybrid. The biggest thing that I think would make someone consider one of these paddles is that the swing weights are a lot lower than some of the other power paddles that are in this list. The 14mm elongated is 112 swing weight, the 16mm is 115, and then if you look at the wide body, the 14mm was a 98 swing weight, which is ridiculously light. That is very, very low. No one should have any issue swinging that paddle. You could give that paddle to probably an 8-year-old and they wouldn't have any issue swinging it. And then the 16mm version of it is also very easy to swing at 100 swing weight. And then for the hybrid, that comes in at 104. So if you're looking for paddles that are very fast in the hand, very easy to swing, the Franklin C45s are going to give that to you. And because of this, these paddles are great for people that love to tinker. If you want to customize a paddle and make it exactly what you want it to be, you have so much room to do whatever the heck you want to these paddles. So yeah, if you're someone that likes to tinker, C45 is great. Now, as far as the cons, I do think that these out of the box have the least amount of power of any paddle in this list. To achieve the higher amounts of power that you can get out of them, you have to put weight on these. So if you're someone that doesn't like to customize your paddle, I would not recommend looking at the C45s. These definitely benefit from tinkering around with lead or tungsten tape. And of course, these are a Gen 3 style paddle, so over time, they probably will have core crushing issues. But the one update I actually will give from the review that I first did on this paddle, because within about a week, mine was breaking down. I've now seen quite a bit of these in the wild, and I've heard far less issues than I was expecting. So I don't know if it was just an early batch issue or if I just got really unlucky, but overall, I really haven't heard that many issues with the C45, and I know a handful of people in our area that are using them. Does that mean they're immune from breaking? No, absolutely not. But if you do watch my full review, I think they're more durable than what I initially expected them to be. All right, now really quickly, there are a couple paddles that are missing from this list, and you might be wondering, why didn't they make the list for me? And the first one is going to be the Proton Flamingo. Now, I do think there are some appealing things about this paddle. One, basically every unit I have ever seen in the wild is extremely gritty, so if you're looking for something that has a lot of grit, the Flamingo is going to give it to you. But these have been known to core crush like crazy. I've seen a bunch of core crushed ones in the wild. I've heard plenty of stories online, but that's kind of in line with the Pro 4. Same price, and then the main downside to me is that it only comes in one shape, which is an elongated with a short handle, so you don't have a lot of options. But I wouldn't say that means the performance of the paddle's bad. I think it's just you have less options than Joola, it's known to break just as much, and the biggest advantage that it has over some of the other paddles in the list is that they come very gritty. Next up would be the Ripple. And honestly, at this point, I just think there are better power paddles than the Ripple. The swing weights out of the box were really high, so I think it just limits who can actually use the paddle. And then the sweet spot was also smaller than some of the other comparable power paddles now. So to me, it had its chance to be really good and the high swing weights just kind of ruined it. And now other foam core paddles have caught up and in my opinion, kind of just made it less relevant than it could have been. Doesn't mean it's a bad paddle. If you own one and you like it, keep using it. It has very good pop and power and would have made it into the high tier performance if not for some of the things I just mentioned. But overall, I think there are better options. And then lastly would be the FLIK F1. I do think of all the paddles that we've talked about, this is the most powerful, the most poppy, and it does have really good grit, but it comes at the expense of control. The sweet spot's not that big, the stability is not that awesome, and I found that sometimes I would just launch a ball, and other times it would go nowhere. Kind of like the PaddleTek, where that fiberglass patch that the FLIK F1 has just makes it harder to use. So to me, if you're someone that's like playing qualifiers and you have really great soft hands, it's probably going to be an awesome paddle. But for most of the people watching this video, it's not one that I can really recommend. All right, now for those of you who are curious, I'll tell you what my first to last would be. And again, remember, this is my own personal list. I wouldn't take it as your own list. Do your own research from what we just talked about. But number one, we would have the Boomstik. I recently just got first place in a mixed doubles tournament that was 4-7 to 5-0. Probably closer to 4-7 if we're being honest. And we went 10-0. So to me, the Boomstik played great. I'm loving how it plays right now. It's a lot of fun, but again, it is very expensive. And then moving on would be the Honolulu J2NF. I also got silver in a 5-0 plus money ball, which was a pretty big deal to me using this paddle. So as far as consistency and being able to do what I want with a paddle, J2NF does it awesome. Next up after that, we would have the 11624 Alpha Pro Power / Power Series and the SLK Era. These are kind of all in a very similar tier for me, so I could take any of those and feel pretty comfortable as well. Next up would be the Joola Pro IV and the Thrive Project Fury, because just like the Era and the 11624s, these are, basically right on par with each other. Then next up, we have the GX2 Power. This is a paddle that I think is very good, and a lot of people who want a softer feeling power paddle are really gonna like. But for me, it was really hard to find my groove with this paddle. The consistency of like some of my shots, my drops or softer rolls or even resets were just really hard to dial in. I think the slightly more muted feel and the break in and the consistency it was kind of all over the place for me. I can recognize it's a very good paddle, but for my current play style, it's a little too much and hard for me to use. Next up, we would have the Franklin C45s. I think overall these are good, but definitely wouldn't be one of my top picks. And then in last would probably be the PaddleTek. I think the sweet spot is a really big drawback to me at this point. I do really love the consistency and durability of the paddles, but that sweet spot size is a really big downside for me. I'm only an average amateur player, so sweet spot size still matters for me. But anyways, that would be my top to bottom list of the paddles we just talked about today. So there you guys go. Those are the pros and cons of all these different power paddles. I hope it helps you narrow it down. And like I said, if you're looking for full reviews, you can check out the links down in the description. But otherwise, I'll catch you guys in the next video.